It's very common when we receive unwelcome criticism about any aspect of our life. The first thing that we come up with is, you know what? You don't know me. This is an excellent retort to people who give you unsolicited life advice. They don't know you, they don't know where you started, and they don't know how hard you worked to get where you are now. Ergo, their advice is worthless. However, when it comes to criticism of your work, things that you produce, whether that's your fiction that you're writing, your memoir, or some other creative pursuit, the fact that the person does not know you does not, in itself, exclude their advice from being helpful. When I work with writers, often they fall into one of two camps as far as criticism goes. Either A, they accept no one's criticism, no matter how well-informed or well-meaning, because their work is their baby and they know best and everybody else is just a hater. Ugh, these people are insufferable. But in some ways, equally insufferable is the other camp, who accepts and internalizes every single piece of criticism, regardless of who it comes from. They are, of course, most willing to believe the bad criticism, the unhelpful criticism. This comes from a place of deep insecurity and self-loathing. And people who suffer from these issues, we'll call them, particularly creative people, often genuinely don't know whose criticism to listen to, whose is valuable, and most importantly, why it's valuable. So today's video is all about who gets to criticize your work and why their criticism is valuable. The first thing to establish when weighing someone's criticism is asking yourself whether or not they are knowledgeable on the specific topic that they are criticizing. For instance, if you've been following me for a while, you know that I started off my collegiate career with the intention of becoming a teacher. I went through all of my coursework and I did my semester on student teaching. And what I found was that the entire world is just full of teaching advice. Now, these people have never, ever taught anything in their whole lives. They've been students, yes, definitely, but they've never taught anything. They've certainly never taught 30 distinct human beings with different learning styles, with, we'll just say, different situations at home, and different personalities as a whole, and you have to teach them all as a group. They would say inane things like, make it fun. That's actually not how learning works. Learning is actually distinct from entertainment, okay? We as humans tend to seek out smart people, people who have made a name for themselves and who very clearly have knowledge. But not all knowledge is the same. So for instance, if you've produced a wonderful erotic romance novel and your very intelligent, we'll say supervisor at work, reads it and gives you negative feedback, you might be inclined to take their negative feedback just on the face of it. You work with this woman. You know that she's smart, you know that she's able, and you know that she is a very good reader. But what you may not know is that she doesn't read romance. She certainly doesn't write it. She spends her leisure reading time on nonfiction mostly. And when she does foray into fiction, it's usually something like historical fiction, broad, sweeping magnum opuses about important historical events shown through the eyes of maybe fictional characters. This makes her a good reader. It doesn't make her a good critic of your flirty, erotic romance. So before you take someone's criticism on your specific book that you've written, ask yourself, does this person read and or write in your genre? I say read or write because there is a tendency sometimes for people to say, you've never written a book, what do you know? You don't have to write a book to know what a good book is, just like you don't have to be a parent to know what bad parenting looks like. That's right, parents, I said it, come at me. The only thing you need to consider is, do they understand what your genre includes? Do they understand what sells well in your genre? And do they understand what works well in your genre? And if the answer to all that is yes, regardless of whether they themselves are authors, then perhaps their criticism is worth listening to. The second thing to consider is whether or not this person's feedback is actionable. If you get comments like, it didn't really work for me, or, I just don't like your protagonist. She's so, Side note, if you use the word in your book review, shame on you. While it's good to take the temperature of your overall readership, if you're in the feedback stages of your writing, meaning before you've published it, having feedback like this is completely unhelpful, and it kind of says something about the reviewer, that they may not have the language skills needed to articulate to you that you've made a mistake and you need to recalibrate. This isn't to say that their opinion is worthless. They might be right on the money that your book is missing something. But if they can't articulate to you exactly what that something is, for instance, you seem to have not included a plot arc. A series of things happen, but there's no arc. There's no conclusion to this. A bunch of stuff happens and the book ends. If they can't articulate these simple things telling you exactly what's wrong with your book, it's not that they're bad people or that they mean bad for you and your work. It's just that they're not going to be helpful for you, and they're not going to help you grow as an author. So if you encounter people like this who just give you these kind of vagaries, it might be worth it to save their feedback until after you've published the book. Number 3 is similar to number 1, but it's not identical. Ask yourself if their feedback is informed, meaning, did this person actually read your book before they gave you their criticism? Bearing in mind that a person doesn't need to actually finish a book to give you good, actionable advice. For instance, if they didn't finish your book, if they just couldn't get through it, that in itself is good feedback. But if the person has never read anything you've written and yet feels empowered to tell you that all Christian authors suck, or you're writing romance, ergo you are producing smut, this is not someone to be listened to. This is someone, most likely, who doesn't even bother reading the news. This is a person who reads the headline and then drops down to the comments. This is not a serious person to be listened to on any topic. Anyone who speaks in vagaries and generalities, and yet feels empowered to give you, author, very specific, demeaning advice about your specific writing, even though they've never read not one word of it. This is not a person to be listened to. My critique partner was once selling her books at a book fair, and a person was walking around from table to table, picking up all the books, reading the back, and then pontificating about what he found wrong with them. The genre, the cover, the type font on the back. This person existed solely to make himself feel better by dragging down others who had actually produced something. And I'm sorry to say that the world is full of these types of people. Now, my writer friend is not one to put up with idiots, which is exactly why she and I are friends. So when he approached her table, she snatched her book out of his hands and said, "You know what, why don't you move along?" Because why wouldn't she do that? This person wasn't going to buy anything. This person probably didn't spend money on books, full stop. He was just a hater, a real one. Feel free to ignore them. Number 4 goes along with the hater line of thinking. Does the person giving you the criticism have an investment in the work? Not in you. This is a very big distinction. It doesn't matter if the person has an investment in you. This isn't your mother. But do they have an investment in your work? And if this person spent money on your book, either individually or as part of a subscription service, in that way they do have an investment in your work. Readers do not like to have their time wasted by crap. So if a person who spent money on your book reads most or all of it and comes back to you saying, "I hated this book, and here's why," chances are this person is not a hater. This person is someone who bought your book thinking that they would like it, and then to their great disappointment, they didn't. This does not make them a bad person. This does not make them envious of you or hateful in general. What it means is, for one reason or another, your book didn't work for them. Read these reviews carefully. There is a possibility that what they thought they were getting isn't what they got. For instance, I have an author friend of mine who writes science fiction time travel. His books are wonderful, but for some reason, and I think it's a quirk of the Amazon algorithm, he gets a lot of readers from what is that stupid series called? Outlander. He gets a lot of Outlander readers who end up not liking his books because they're not like Outlander. They're not romances. They're not bodice-ripping Scottish Highland historical fiction. They're hard sci-fi time travel. They even have like the technology spaceship things on the cover that I avoid because that's not my thing. But he communicated very clearly with his back blurb and his cover what this book was about. They chose to ignore those things and buy his book anyway, and were disappointed. But when expectation meets reality in a not so flattering way, sometimes that means bad reviews. What you have to ask yourself is, were this person's expectations rational? Is your book communicating something that isn't actually in your book? Does the back blurb promise action, wherein mostly it's a character-driven think piece? These types of reviews can be very helpful. And most of the time, you don't actually need to change your content. You might need to change your cover. You might need to change your back cover blurb. And if so, that might be a little bit costly, but it will be worth it in the amount of book sales you get and glowing 4- and 5-star reviews from people who got exactly what they were promised by your cover and your blurb. And finally, number 5 is more in regards to people you actually know. Because as an author, whether you do this full-time or whether you do it part-time, the people you know will have something to say about the books you write, and it won't always be positive. Some of them will say these negative things to your face, often if they're a sibling or other close relative, but most of the time, if they're a friend, a work acquaintance, or just a friend of a friend, they won't say these things to your face. You'll hear them second or even third hand. And going back to the hater's remark, it is tempting to just brush these off. Oh, you're just jealous because you've never done anything with your life. And maybe that's true. The question to ask yourself when weighing these comments from people who are close to you is, do you want their approval? Is this someone that you admire? Is this a person that you find to be thoughtful, intelligent, funny, any of the positive attributes that we give to the people that we know? If the answer is yes, then even if they have bad things to say about your book or the choice in and of itself to write, it might warrant thinking on. Just because they're smart doesn't mean that they're right, but it does mean that their opinion holds some weight. And I really want to emphasize this to the authors who struggle with insecurity and are oh so willing to believe every single negative thing that comes their way. Listen to me carefully. If criticism comes from a person that you do not admire or whose lifestyle that you don't really approve of, you have my permission to completely ignore everything they have to say on every single topic, most importantly, your creative work. I've only just started watching Rick and Morty, so this is all kind of new for me. I know you fanboys are probably like, whatever, I was there for the premiere. Yes, I hear you. But it's new to me, and one thing I really enjoyed, and I forget which episode it was, where Rick, who is the mad scientist grandpa character, wheels on a crowd who was booing him, and he says, "Do you think I care about your boos? I've seen what makes you cheer." It was meant as kind of a throwaway line, something that we should all laugh at, like, oh, haha, he's so arrogant. But it is really insightful. If you're dealing with a person who lives a life that you find immoral, who laughs at things that you find to be cruel, who spends their time in ways that you find to be at best wasteful, at worst destructive, why then would you ever consider their advice, their feedback, or God forbid their guidance on anything that you do? Regardless of your genre, it is vital that you maintain control over your own work, and control starts up here. If you start making changes to your work based on what every idiot has to say, one, it'll never be done because you're too busy making changes based on what Joe F-tard in Kentucky had to say on Twitter when you posted your book blurb. Who is this person? He has an anime avatar. I'm not on Twitter, but as I understand it, an anime avatar doesn't bode good things for this person's character and or intellect. So why would you listen to them just because they comment prolifically on perhaps the worst social media network in existence? You're doing it because you're insecure, because you're afraid that if people don't like your book, then they won't like you. Here's something that took me a little while to learn, and I hope that you learn it quicker than I did. There are some people that if they like you, that doesn't speak well of you. Carefully cultivate whose opinions that you are accepting, and be even more careful about who you allow into your head, your most private of spaces. Because all that self-doubt, all that niggling doubt that comes from taking advice from literally anybody, it will show up in your writing. So find your core readership and write for them. Even if you are writing smut, as your jealous second cousin says. Well, so what? It's selling, right? The people that you write for, they like your smut, and they would like some more of it, please. The wonderful thing about being an author is that you don't actually have to cater to everyone. You can cater to a very small group. Make that small group happy, and the money will flow in. There's so many books released every single day that no human could possibly read all of them, which is why it's so hard to find an audience. But once you do find that audience, once you find your people, even if it's just 1,000 people out of the millions on this planet, that's your community, that's your audience, and that's who you want to make happy. And forget everybody else. This is your party. Invite who you want, and don't be afraid to kick anybody out if they came without an invitation. So now that I've told you what I think, tell me what you think. What scares you most about putting a new book out or even letting others read your work? Whose criticism are you most afraid of receiving? Let me know down below. And that's all I have for now. So until next time, take care and write well.